Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon pre-release guide. Again, this time it's going to be for the brand new set BT14 Blast Ace, set to release on November 17th of 2023. So when it comes to the sealed and limited environment, we do have a slight change to the rule set in order to make it, well, functional to begin with. So things that you're going to have to keep in mind is the fact that you're going to be building a 40 card deck out of the sealed pool that you're going to be working with. Then players can ignore Digivolution color requirements, but they still have to meet level and cost requirements. Color can also be ignored for DNA Digivolution and special Digivolutions. Colors still matter on effects, so if a card is asking for a specific color, that can't be ignored, and options also need color requirements to be used, while also the breeding area having a special change, where if you don't have any Digi-eggs in your raising area, then you could choose to raise a level 3 Digimon. Keep in mind, you will not draw a card for doing so, but the fact that if you don't have any eggs, you still can have access and utilize your raising area. Then, when it comes to the pricing for this event, just for entering, you're going to be given a Blast Ace pre-release pack, which is going to be containing 2 cards in it. One of them is going to be a foil uncommon, that's going to be pre-release stamped, and the other is going to be of a foil rare, also pre-release stamped. Then you're going to be getting the Gatomon Promo 31, as an additional participation prize, and the winner of the event is going to get BT9 Greymon X Antibody. So when looking at the set, you should really focus on the rares and below. Understanding how a box breakdown works can help determine the odds of seeing specific cards, which goes into your card analysis and judgment on what you're ultimately expecting to pull and going to be seeing to, well, play with. So in a normal booster box, your pull rates are going to be the fact that you're going to get an average of 7 SRs per box and 2 hits per box. So a hit is going to be either a secret rare or alt art, which means out of the 24 booster packs in the booster box, only 9 of them will have something actually super special in it. This means that the likelihood of seeing an SR or secret rare is going to be rather low. So in a booster box, you're usually going to see mostly commons through rares. You're usually going to see 3 to 4 of any given common, 2 to 3 of any given uncommon, and 1 to 2 of any given rare. So as far as some general deck building tips, remember, as I mentioned before, your deck is going to consist of 40 cards. So you can have all of the extra cards be used as your sideboard to be able to swap in and out with your main deck that you're going to be playing with during the event in between rounds. So what does a generally good curve look like for this type of event? Well, when it comes to the level 2s, you're going to basically play whatever you're going to be given, up to 5 Digi-eggs. So the level 3s, you're generally going to want to run around 12. The level 4s, you're going to want to run around 10. The level 5s, you're going to want to run around 7. The level 6s, around 5. And you're going to want to leave at least 6 spots for various other cards. Other cards can be Tamers, options, or just more Digimon, if you really wanted it to be. So when it comes to deck building and card analysis, there's an acronym that I always like to use to kind of categorize cards to help me figure out what I want and should be playing with. The acronym I use is going to be BREAD. So B is going to be your bombs. This is usually win condition or cards of high impact. R is going to be removal. These are going to be the abilities to disrupt the opponent and clear problematic cards from the field. E is going to be your evasion, so these are going to be your more defensive cards, whether it's you protecting yourself or you stopping the opponent from being able to aggress. Then A is going to be aggro. These are going to be your general good use and high offensive cards. And then D is going to be duds. These are cards you're going to want to avoid at all costs just because they're really bad cards for the limited environment. So, more specifically, these cards can fit into multiple different categories, and a card that fits into more categories is usually one you're going to want to prioritize over something that fits into least of these categories. Unless they're just dud cards, then you're never going to want to use them. So, when it comes to bombs, more specifically, as I already mentioned before, these are going to be your high impact cards, the cards that you're going to use to try to win the game, and in Digimon, this is most likely going to end up being your level 6. So your level 6 is going to be the strongest and highest level Digimon that you could Digivolve into, and we do have a decent number of level 6s that have some pretty decent high levels of impact, whether it's for control or going to be for offensive capabilities. Then, as I already mentioned with removal, these are going to be the ways that you're going to try to interact with your opponent to try to remove or get rid of problematic cards to slow them down, so that way you could put yourself ahead of what the opponent is trying to do. Removal in Digimon comes in a lot of different forms, like a deletion, bounce back to hand, put to the bottom of the deck, put into the security, DP reducing down to 0, de-Digivolve, and attacking into the opponent's Digimon, just to name a few ways that we have to be able to remove cards from the field. And when it comes to removal, this can come in various different forms on all different types of cards, whether it's going to be from a Digimon or an option or even a Tamer at times. As I already mentioned, with evasion, it's always good to make sure you have some defensive capabilities to make it harder for the opponents to interact with you. These are going to be defensive mechanics such as blocker and security attack minus to slow down what the opponent could potentially be doing, or the inverse on making sure your cards are just harder for the opponents to interact with and get rid of, with effects like reboot, evade, DP plus, especially on the opponent's turn, barrier, and just general effects that say that it can't be targeted or affected by some of the opponent's cards. Then, as I already mentioned, for aggro, you do end up needing to find some way to be able to aggress onto the opponent to actually deal that damage. Aggro comes in a couple of different forms, whether it's you just blindly swinging it into the opponent's security with a really strong Digimon, or you just utilizing really good and well-statted cards just because of their overall effectiveness. And then when it comes to duds, these are cards that you really can't utilize their abilities very effectively or at all, just because of how Digimon's set design is, where sometimes it's asking for cards outside of the set to be able to make useful, or it's asking for hyper-specific cards in order to, again, make use of their ability, and if the cards that it's asking for are on the higher rarity, then it's going to be even harder to utilize these cards. So it's not like these cards are going to be bad per se, it's just usually you're going to want to put more effort into cards that are going to yield better results than what some of the duds in the set are going to be trying to focus around. Looking at the Digitamas, most of the time you don't really have control over how many Digitamas you have and what Digitamas you're seeing, but in this set specifically, not all the Digitamas are created equal, especially for this competitive environment. So most of them have really bad abilities that aren't really going to be doing anything, or have a really specific condition to be able to trigger them, which is what's going to be making them bad. So that's going to make the Bukamon and Koromon two of the most standout Digitamas that you could use just because their effects are more generically usable. Then, when it comes to the Tamers I don't necessarily think are going to be that important to use, but I definitely think that the Tamers compared to the options are definitely going to be more usable. So when it comes to a lot of these Tamers, they do have a very specific ability with specific synergies in mind to make them even more usable, but at least with a good amount of them, they still have a generic effect that you could try to take advantage of, so that way they still have value even if you can't utilize their synergy all of the time. Then with the options in the set, I actually think that the options is the weakest part of the set, which is really ironic because usually the options is where a lot of your removal and various other abilities that you might not have on your Digimon are going to be coming from. This set just has too specific of synergy with a lot of the options, making them not necessarily the most viable of choices. But when it comes to the Digimon, there's a whole lot of actually usable and playable Digimon just because they have a lot of on-play effects or good when digivolving effects you want to actually use, and sometimes Digimon will even have both, making the card have high levels of usability, so that way you don't necessarily have to be afraid of utilizing it like an option if you need to. Then there's going to be no level 7s in the set, so we do have to keep that in mind as far as the average highest DP threshold that our Digimon needs to clear in order to make sure that our attacks are going to be safe or our Digimon hard to interact with, and that average is going to be 12k. Then we do know that this set is going to be introducing Ace Digimon cards. Those are going to be on the higher rarities, so it's not like there's going to be a huge likelihood that they're going to be seen and played, especially since decks most likely aren't going to have more than one of them. But it is better to keep in mind that you usually want to play smarter and not harder, and if possible, try to play around them the best that you can. This set also has a lot of really good defensive tools, so you want to make sure you can take advantage of them and make sure that you have ways to play around them. Just as an example, there is a whole bunch of cards with the inheritable ability of blocker, so if the opponent can set up a really big blocker, you need to make sure that you have an answer for that, or inversely set one up yourself, and even though that can kind of create a stalled board state, usually there's going to be something that's going to allow you to be able to break that, whether that's you just flooding the field, or you just outvaluing the opponent based on the type of cards that you have. Then when it comes to specific synergies, there are trait-based synergies and name-based synergies that you're going to want to try to think about utilizing or playing around, or if you don't have enough of those synergies, then you might want to ignore them altogether. So when it comes to some more general tips, there's two main metas that the pre-release generally likes to lean towards. The first one is either going to be a more rookie rush focused meta, which is just a hyper aggressive meta where you're just going to try to slam hyper efficient bodies on the field and swing as often as you possibly can. Then the second type of meta is going to be a more stack based meta, where this is going to be you just trying to digivolve up into your level 6 and make sure your level 6 is going to be as impactful with as many good abilities as it can possibly have. The Rookie Rush meta is only viable if there actually is a lack of defensive tools like the blocker ability, because there is no de-incentivization for you to want to play that way. So while the opponent is building up, you could be building wide, and that allows you to be able to outpace and outdamage the opponent, especially if you're utilizing and focusing on those more efficient cards. But this set more specifically does have enough defensive tools, which is why this set is going to be a more stack-based meta. And then as far as some other general tips, it's always good to make sure you're going to be bringing water, snacks, and TCG supplies like playmats and sleeves, so that way you're going to be prepared physically as best as you possibly can. Then when it comes to the mental aspect, you're going to usually want to try to study up on the rules, the new mechanics that the set is trying to introduce and play around with, specific interactions, and the general card pool, so that way you could try to make the best analyses as best as you possibly can when it comes to deck building and your plays. Then there's a whole bunch of important questions that you need to ask yourself when you're actually going to be deck building, because deck building is going to be one of the most important aspects to pre-release, because if you build a bad deck, it's going to be harder to perform and win with. So some of the questions that I generally like to ask myself is, what does my card pool look like? What are my win conditions going to be and how I'm going to get there? What synergies am I going to be using, especially any cross-color or archetypal synergies if I have any? And if I do have any, what would I be utilizing and trying to build towards? And how many of that I need in order to make it worth utilizing? Then I also like to ask myself, what cards should I be prioritizing? and various questions like that to make sure that I can be as prepared with my deck as I possibly can be when facing off against other opponents. But at the end of the day, this is just a more casual environment where you're just supposed to have fun and test and play around with some of the new cards before they get released. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.